Michael Chandler vs Conor McGregor is the next fight to make. Of course, both Conor and Michael Chandler are extremely entertaining fighters, which would make for a huge money fight for the UFC. Obviously, any matchup with Conor McGregor involved is always going to be huge for the UFC, but a matchup between these two guys is just going to be such an exciting fight in my opinion, and I think it needs to be made. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. It's been pretty clear that as of late, Conor McGregor has not been all that successful. With his last win coming all the way back in early 2020 over Donald Cowboy Cerrone, and his two last fights coming off back-to-back losses to Dustin Poirier, Conor's in a very interesting position at this point. Conor obviously doesn't deserve a title shot at this point coming off back-to-back losses, but at the same time he is Conor McGregor, and the champ of the lightweight division, Charles Oliveira, who's technically not the champ, but basically we all know that he is in reality, did call out Conor McGregor and wants that matchup, and it seems like Conor is also interested in that matchup, so if he does want that matchup, he probably will get it. But the only thing that would probably keep Conor from taking that fight is the fact that he's a lot bigger now, and he might not want to go back down to 155, and he might want to stay at 170 for the rest of his career. And one other thing that I wanted to quickly mention is it seems like Charles Oliveira wants to fight at the December card in Brazil, and there's been some reports recently that came out saying that Conor McGregor might not be ready to fight until 2023. Now, I don't think this is a great matchup for Conor, and I would probably give Charles a 75 to 80% chance of winning this fight, especially if he takes the fight to the ground. It's basically over at that point, but the only way that Conor would be able to win is with a knockout. If Conor is able to catch Charles coming in with a counter shot with that left hand, there's a possibility that he can completely knock him out, because although Conor hasn't had all that much success as of late, he still has a phenomenal left hand, and he still has phenomenal boxing. And you also have to remember that Charles Oliveira is extremely hittable, so there is somewhat of a possibility with a knockout for Conor. But of course, I would certainly bet on Charles Oliveira in that potential matchup. Now, there were also some reports saying that Conor might want to go up to welterweight and fight for the belt against Kamaru Usman, but it seems like Kamaru is locked into a matchup against Leon Edwards, and Leon is finally going to get that title shot. But even if this fight were to happen, I think this would probably be the worst matchup for Conor out of all these potential matchups, because on the feet, although Conor is a lot more skilled than Kamaru is, Kamaru still has a ton of power in his hands and has a phenomenal chin. So it'll be very difficult for me personally to see Conor knocking out Kamaru. But if Kamaru ever wanted to take the fight to the ground, he could at will, as he is a phenomenal wrestler. Not even Colby Covington, who's also a phenomenal wrestler, could out-wrestle him. And the fact that Conor certainly does struggle in the wrestling department would just make it a field day for Kamaru. Now, I don't think this matchup is all that likely, and I think if Conor were to get a title shot, it would have to be against Charles Oliveira, but at the same time, you do need to keep it on the potential list for Conor. Now, other potential matchups for Conor could be Nate Diaz, which is always going to be there, and I would probably give the edge to Conor in that potential matchup. Now, one thing that I would like to say about that is that fight would most likely be at 170, and Conor could potentially gas out even more at 170 than he did at 155, and that could be a potential problem for him if he does go up against Nate. Another potential matchup that I think would be a lot of fun, but not all that many people are talking about, is Conor vs Tony Ferguson. Now, Tony is obviously coming off a brutal knockout in his last fight against Michael Chandler, and he's probably going to need a decent amount of time off just to recover from that and train back, so that could potentially work out if Conor indeed doesn't fight until 2023. But the matchup that I personally really want to see, and a matchup that a lot of other people also want to see, is Conor vs Michael Chandler. And I think this matchup makes a ton of sense for a bunch of different reasons. The first reason being Michael Chandler is a legitimate contender. And what I mean by this is, of course, the UFC could easily just give Conor McGregor a title shot right at this point, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense, and it would make a lot of people unhappy. But if Conor were to go and fight Michael Chandler, and if he were to beat him, then I think you could certainly make a much better case for Conor getting a title shot than you could at this point. Now, I personally don't think even if he did beat Michael Chandler that it would be all that fair to give him a title shot, but obviously it would make a lot more sense than it does at this point. Now, the next reason why I think this fight makes a ton of sense is there's a legitimate path for Conor to winning this fight. Now, I personally think Michael Chandler would win this matchup, and I think he would probably be a pretty big favorite. There still is a legitimate chance that Conor does win this potential matchup. And similar to the Charles Oliveira matchup, if the fight does go to the ground, it's probably over at that point. But if the fight does stay on the feet, Michael Chandler is extremely hittable and he overextends a ton. So if Conor is able to catch Michael while he's overextending, there's a legitimate chance that Conor could TKO him, as Michael Chandler certainly has been TKO'd a bunch of times in the past as well. And when you consider that Michael Chandler doesn't have the best cardio, that would also be a benefit to Conor, because of course Conor doesn't have great cardio as well, but if both fighters don't have great cardio, it almost equals out a little bit. Now, I personally think Michael Chandler has better cardio than Conor, but at the same time, neither of these guys are known for their cardio. But if Michael Chandler plays a smart fight, which he has not been doing as of late, in terms of just taking the fight to the ground and just dominating Conor, I think he would win relatively easily. But if Michael Chandler plays to the crowd, as he typically has been doing as of late, and doesn't fight a smart fight, I think Conor would have a legitimate chance. And the last reason why I think this fight makes a ton of sense is it's going to sell extremely well for the UFC. Now, obviously, I mentioned before in the video that any Conor McGregor fight is always going to sell well, which of course is true. I think if you were to put Conor up against Michael Chandler, it would sell extremely well, because Michael Chandler isn't necessarily a guy who's known by most casual fans, but one thing that I will say is after that front kick knockout that he had to the face against Tony Ferguson, I think a lot of casual fans are going to know who Michael Chandler is at this point, and if you were to make this matchup, I think it would just sell extremely well. So I think this matchup makes a ton of sense for Conor, because if he were to beat Michael Chandler, I think you could make a legitimate case for a title shot for him, or at least a better case than you could in the past, and also of course he's going to make a ton of money. I think it makes a ton of sense for Michael Chandler because he's going to get a huge payday fighting Conor McGregor, and he's going to add to his legacy. And I also think it makes a ton of sense for the UFC because this fight is going to sell extremely well, at least in my opinion. So it's kind of a win-win-win for all sides. And it seems like both Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler are interested in this matchup. So in my opinion, I think this has to be the next matchup that's made for Conor. Now, if Conor can indeed fight until 2023, maybe you give Michael Chandler a filler fight if he does want to fight in between that time. But the thing is, if Michael Chandler does fight somebody else and he does beat him, he's probably going to want a title shot at that point. But I guess at the same time, if he loses to whoever he fights in between, if that does happen, then that Conor fight is still there. But that excitement of that knockout that he just had against Tony Ferguson wouldn't necessarily be there as much. So I think it's probably best if you make this matchup next for both of these guys and don't have a filler fight in between for Chandler. But I guess only time will tell, and we'll see what happens going forward for both of these guys. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Conor McGregor's next matchup should be against Michael Chandler, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.